Lightroom masking. Welcome to Images by Design Studio. I'm Jim Setzer, proprietor here. Thanks for coming to our Lightroom masking seminar. Let's see, if you have been to any of my pre-pandemic workshops, you know I have a little bit of a formula, including welcome and introductions. We'll go around the room, ask everybody to share a little bit about themselves. I want to go back a little bit and touch on Lightroom under the hood a bit, so how Lightroom functions, and I think that will help with an understanding on how these masks work. We'll talk about masking in general and how historically masks have been used in photography and video work. From there, talk about Lightroom's traditional masks. They used to call them filters, and why they changed the term to mask recently. I'm going to talk about the updated masks. Starting in October last year, Lightroom Classic CC version 11 is when Adobe really put some effort into changing these simple filters, which we'll look at, into a really, really powerful set of masks, including some really neat AI type algorithms that make workflow, at least my workflow, go a whole lot faster. I'll give you a word from our sponsor, that's me, and wrap up with a little Q&A. So let's get started with welcomes and introductions. State your name, what's your main axe, and what is your relationship with Adobe Lightroom Classic Creative Cloud. So like I said, I'm Jim Setzer, this is my studio. My main axe for still photography is still full frame Nikon bodies with a myriad of different kind of lenses. My relationship with Adobe Lightroom, I started using Lightroom in 2009, so Lightroom version 3, I think it was. So I've watched it evolve over now, coming up on a decade, as it's gotten better and better. So let's go around the room, starting with...
I'm Matt Mercier.
Hi, Matt.
Good evening.
Okay, so what is Lightroom? This is a quiz. I'm going to read off the potential answers, and we can talk about which answer or answers might be correct. Is it A, a place to store all your photos, B, a photo editing application, C, a dysfunctional darkroom, D, largely confusing and non-intuitive, E, none of the above, or F, all of the above? So Matt, what would you think would be the right answer or answers out of this set?
So technically it catalogs your photos, not necessarily consider that storing your photos.
You are exactly right.
It is definitely a photo editing application, I would consider that. The dysfunctional darkroom, maybe. In some areas, yeah, it can be largely confusing and non-intuitive. There's some parts of Lightroom that are still pretty outdated, original from when they came out with it. But I wouldn't say none of the above, and I wouldn't say necessarily all of the above.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. You know, it can be confusing and non-intuitive, especially for somebody who just opens it up for the first time. Anything that is a powerful piece of software is going to have a lot of functionality, therefore there's going to be a lot of buttons, buttonology to understand, all that kind of stuff. And Lightroom can be all those things for the uninitiated. It is not a place to store your photos, it is at its heart a database. So while Lightroom does help you in the ingesting of your photos from your tethered camera or your memory card and puts those original files into wherever you tell it to put it in your computer, it never touches, it never modifies your original files. What it does is, along the course of that input, it creates a record in its database called the catalog. It's just a relational database. It creates a record every time it imports a file. And that record, before you do anything with it, includes just two things. Where do I go to find the original? And previews, a thumbnail and some other, whatever previews you tell it to create on import, so that it has a visual way for you to find those images in the folder structure that it creates. Then, as you edit the image, every edit you do for that image becomes a new record in that database under that parent record, which is every time you move a slider, the record for that slider for that particular file gets modified. Every time you do a brush stroke in a, what was used to be called filters, now called a mask, that brush stroke, that result of the brush stroke gets put into a record, and you can add multiples of those, et cetera, et cetera. So while your catalog can get pretty large, the catalog never contains your original images. It contains the thumbnails. So it's important to understand that for two reasons. One, that means that Lightroom has two big advantages over other kinds of editing softwares. One, non-destructive, right? Like I said, it's never going to touch your original file. You can always just reset everything or change one record or all records or groups of records or whatever, and you do that just by going back in and manipulating that image in Lightroom. The other thing is nonlinear, right? So like other softwares, if you make a change, let's say I moved up the exposure couple of stops, and then I do about 20 other things, and then I decide I want to change that exposure. I don't have to back out those 20 subsequent steps to get back to this point. I could go to any step in any time and readjust it without losing all the other work that I've done. You can make Photoshop non-destructive and non-linear, but it doesn't natively do that. Natively, it applies changes to like the original layer. You really have to think and use layers extensively to make Photoshop non-destructive, no pixel left behind kind of thing. So that's the two big advantages that Lightroom and its database-centric nature does. And so when we're talking about these masks that we're going to go over tonight, it's really nice that these features are going to come into play, and we're going to see how they come into play as we move along. Okay, so what are masks? And this is Jim's definition of masks. It's a way to describe what parts of an image are revealed. And we'll see, the mask itself says basically what's revealed and what's concealed. Used in the film industry, film photographs, film movies, since the beginning of the 20th century, there have been visual effects. Here's a perfect example of one. Sorry, I clicked that twice. Here's a frame from King Kong. There's Fay Ray. It was a black and white movie, so the masking process was relatively simple. They put a bunch of orange gels on all the lights on the subject, so she became very orange. And then they just put a backdrop behind her that was an opposite color. And by doing that, they can run that first exposure through basically a film printer, a special machine that doesn't understand the purple. It can't pass it through, and you end up with a new piece of film that looks like this, and that's your first mask. All right? So now you have this piece of film that if you were to lay these on top of each other and shoot it again, you would now get a partially exposed piece of film, but only Fay Ray here would be in it. The rest of it would be all unexposed because it was masked by this black area. Okay? You do the same thing for the background, but with an opposite mask. I'm highly simplifying this in the drawing, but the end result is, again, there's more layers that take place, but for the purposes of our conversation today, it's basically this. Use a mask to identify what you don't want to be in the file. Use that to composite two images together in such a way that you achieve some kind of result. Right? And we use this same visual look when we do digital masking. Right? If you see a mask in a Photoshop adjustment layer, or you see a mask revealed in a Lightroom mask that we'll see, you'll actually be able to see the masking layer as it's being presented, and you can use that to adjust. Does that all kind of make sense? All right. So how about things like Photoshop? So in something like Photoshop, it's a mask can use to, one, obfuscate parts of an image, just like you saw this this composite from King Kong, or it can take an adjustment layer and decide what parts of the image the adjustment layer is going to be applied to. by doing the same kind of reveal and conceal. So if it's white, it's being revealed. If it's black, it's being concealed. Lightroom Classic uses masks to describe the area of adjustment. The big difference between Photoshop and Lightroom is one adjustment, one mask. You have to create a layer for some kind of adjustment, like a hue saturation layer or a channels layer or a curves layer or a thing. And every one of those adjustments is going to require a mask. Now you could copy and paste the mask over and over, but in Lightroom, you can take one mask and you can adjust a lot of things. You apply a lot of adjustments to a single mask. Much easier to work with in that regard. Do you see the difference? We used to have this little tool up at the top right-hand side of the panel, and this was your cropping tool, and this was a cloning or a repair tool. This is a red eye reduction nobody ever used because you knew how not to shoot people and get red eye. And then these were the three filters, right? You have this gradient filter. We're going to see an example of what that is, but it basically gradually fades away or fades in, depending on how you look at it. You have this radial, which creates an elliptical shape, and sometimes the ellipse is a circle, that does basically the same thing, kind of identifies a zone. And then you have this brush, and where you could kind of brush in, and you can adjust the shape and size and density of the brush, and you can then, once you've created a mask with one of these, what used to be called filters, you have a handful of controls that you can apply to these masks to dodge and burn and maybe change the contrast a little and the saturation a little, temperature. These are I'm not going to read all these, but basically this is a small subset of things. And up until a year ago, this is all you could do with masks in Lightroom. If you needed to do anything more complex with masks, you were going to round robin out to Photoshop, and you were going to create all those layers and do all the stuff and then bring it back in. But starting in Lightroom Classic 11, they really began to transform the masking technology. And the first thing they did was they changed these three options to this one button. And at first we all thought, well, that's stupid. Now I got to click two things instead of one thing. Why did you do that, Adobe? And the answer is because they were preparing to do all these amazing things. And so now we've got a whole lot more kinds of ways that we can identify and shape and sculpt these masks that Lightroom does natively now that we used to painstakingly have to mask and tape and scrape and do all this kind of stuff with. And we're going to take a look at every one of those, or at least most of them, as we go along the way. So yeah, we're going to do this kind of demo. So we're going to take a look at the traditional masks. We'll just spend a minute there just to show how those traditional masks all work. We're going to talk about masking Boolean operations. This did exist in the traditional mask, although I don't think a lot of people really even knew that they were there. And then we're going to talk about all the new masking tools that Adobe has been rolling out over this past year, starting with background and subject selections, luminance color, and then finally people, which is every one of these really upped the game as far as workflow and identification and making things happen. So with that, I'm going to switch gears over to Lightroom, and we're going to work with just a handful of images that I shot recently. Okay, so let's start with just some traditional. Let's go to this one so we can just do some mask as they were back in the days when they were called filters. So I would pick one of these. Let's start with like a brush mask. And the brush mask, what you would do is you would set a size for your brush, and you can also use the scroll wheel to make that bigger or smaller. You would set the amount of feathering, right? So more feathering, it would kind of fall off from the center to the edges of this brush. You can set the amount of flow. So this would be very, very light. So this would be good for good, fine work if you really, really want to be sensitive about flow. Think of that flow as like opacity of the brush as you're painting along. Think of it as a spray can, and that's full flow. That's like really intense. And density provides the amount of grain that would come in with the brush, whether it was solid color, density would be like a solid block, and flow in here at 100%. So if I use this, and let's take the feather all the way down, it'll be just like drawing with like a magic marker. You see how solid and edgy that is? That's no feathering and full flow. And boy, that's pretty horrible. So let's get rid of that. More likely in your brush, you would probably do something like, I don't know, let's do a 50% flow, 50% density, and I'll feather that out a little bit. And you can see where the feathers, you can see the main part of the brush, and now you can see it's much lighter. And now I can be a little bit more artistic with where the density of that brush is. Now, when you brush onto this, that mask that it's creating in this particular case is rasters. It's just like pixels, right? The important thing about that is you can't just now, once it's laid down on your image, go back and just adjust the size and expect that the thing that you've already laid down is going to change. That's unique and different than the other two masks. But you're going to get an idea, and I can show or not show the actual overlay. I use green because the red overlay on red people like red lips, I can't see it, so green works. The mask is still in place. I've just turned it off so I can see the original image, and now I've got all these different kinds of controls. You can see a lot more sliders are here that we didn't used to have in the old days. But let's go ahead just to show what's happening here. I can bring the exposure way up, and you can kind of see that S-shaped curve. You can bring it down, and you can sort of see the shadow it created. And you can basically, once you've established your mask, decide exactly how you want to adjust that area. Maybe we want to, like, I don't know, bring the saturation just way up. And now she's got a little pink there. And of course, if I go back to my brush, now I can add to that mask with some more heavy-handed stuff like this. And as you can see, the adjustments that I had set are going to be applied to that. And now the mask looks like that, not the simple one. So that's the brush mask. There's also this thing called auto mask, which I used to use quite a lot. So if I wanted to make sure that I wanted the mask to, say, go down the legs of this chair, but not spill out over to the rest of it, as long as I keep my little crosshairs inside the black, it will stay inside the black and not affect what's outside. Now, if I accidentally slip, oh, look at that. It messed up. But the auto mask was a way for us to refine the mask to the point where we could select things or select edges or whatever. All right, let's take a look at the other two masks. Let me get rid of this one. So we can now do a linear gradient. So if you look at this picture, the subject is up here, but the floor is just too bright. So I would like to darken this floor a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a gradient. I'm going to press the H for hide and unhide. And this shows me some controls on this mask. So unhidden, there are some, this is a vector mask, meaning the only information in the record of this mask is what's the location of the center point, how far away is this gradient zone, and what's its rotation. So now I can modify this because it is a vector mask. It's not creating a set of pixels on the screen. It's just creating this record with this definition. So I can come in here and I can make the gradient go top to bottom. I can make it really tight. This is 100% mask. This is 0% mask, and I can just adjust as I need to. And then when I decide I kind of have a mask that I think I like, now I can bring in my darken just the area that is covered by that gradient, and I can now take the eye away from the floor. It's no longer the brightest part of the image. It's bringing me up to my subject and the subject's shadow, which is really the primary part of this. Oh, by the way, this is for a photo of an album cover that she's doing. So she had that Stevie Ray Vaughan vibe she was going for, and that's what she was doing. All right, so that's basic mask. Oh yeah, let me do a radial mask. Let's say we want to bring up the detail in the guitar a little bit. See, the guitar is pretty much fully black, but I'll add a radial gradient. I'll do the same thing here. I'll kind of, and the same thing, I've got controls, right? So again, the record is the center point of this ellipse, the distance of the minor and major axes, right? So I can continue to stretch and pull and adjust these. The amount of feathering, and then the last bit of data is the this handle right here is going to allow me to rotate it. So now I can continue to shape this radial mask to just kind of cover the guitar the way I want, and now I can come over here and I can maybe bump the overall exposure a tiny bit, and I'm really more interested in the shadows. So now I can, do you see the detail coming out there a little bit? I don't know if you can see it on that display very well, but let me just like go way overboard. Yep. All right. Now, here's a problem, right? We've created this elliptical mask over an object that is not elliptical. So this is where the Boolean operations come into play. Right? I want to go to this mask and I want to say, oh, well, here's my mask. It doesn't quite fit the shape. See, it's spilling over onto this backdrop, creating this weird halo-y shape, and I don't want that. So I'm going to subtract from this, and I can just use a brush. So now I can come in here. You notice the circle is a minus instead of a plus. That tells me I'm getting ready to subtract from. And get rid of the, let's drop the feathering quite down, because I'm going to want to come in along the edge of this guitar. And I can just come in and erase it. Now I've added to a vector mask a Boolean raster mask. Pretty neat stuff, right? It's kind of neat. But that's kind of how we have been using these masks up until a year ago. And it's taken quite a lot of work. Right? I'd have to come in here every image, and I'd have to get rid of all this halo-y effect, and kind of cut in here a little bit as it kind of spilled off to an area I didn't want. And oh, look at that, I screwed up. Now I got to back up a little bit. So using mask was very time consuming. Not to say that it was better in Photoshop. Photoshop, up until a year ago, really didn't have great selection tools that would allow me to select really complicated things. You still have to build your selection based on some criteria, or you do it yourself and use the pen tool and all the other things to define that selection and convert the selection to a mask that you can apply to your stuff. All right, so let's start going to some of the new AI selection tools, starting with subject and background, which are basically the opposite of each other. So this, if I click on this, it's going to do some AI noodling around in this image, and is going to see if it can figure out what the subject, based on contrast. And it's done a pretty good job of finding everywhere that there is strong contrast and selecting that separate from the rest. If I needed to make this mask in the old days, this would be several hours worth of work for this one image. And that's pretty rough. But now that I've selected my subject, I can bring up the exposure of just my subject, and I can go overboard and get kind of stupid with it, or I can make the whole thing some horrible 80s color selection, kind of crazy stuff like that. But anything that's in the slider, so you can take any slider that's in this highlighted, this basic panel, and you can apply it to your new mask that Lightroom has created for you. This has always been there as well. It's always been hidden behind a little Dorito chip. You have to pull it down and you would get this little slider, and you can change the application strength of a filter / mask. What I normally do is I will, not using masks, I will adjust for my subject, because that's the most important thing anyway. And I'm just going to adjust the entire frame for my subject, which in this case is blown out the background. It's way too busy. And now I'm going to use the masking tool to just select my background, which I can now return to where I want it to be. Right? I can now just dial that down, and now my subject is exposed the way I want. And now you can do more Boolean operators. Oh, I've completely dropped the background. Maybe I like the way that looks up here. But keeping this mask in mind, I don't want the floor to be quite this dark. So now I can subtract from that mask a linear gradient. And now I'm pulling back the linear gradient, and you noticed the mask is still there, but now the floor is not. And if I see both of these things, you can see I have my background mask, but now I've pulled it back by Boolean ORing it with this additional mask. And you can still kind of move that around. You can see how it's applying to just that part of the scene. So it makes this kind of complex burning and dodging so much faster than we ever could do before, which is pretty amazing. Two different ways you could kind of achieve the same results. If I pop back until I didn't have that before. Oh, there we go. I could use this tool and say, intersect this mask with another mask. So let's intersect that mask with that linear gradient. Now, instead of pulling from the bottom to wipe away that, I'm going to intersect it with this mask from above. So I'm anding these, I'm anding them. That makes sense? Let's go on to some other new AI tools. And let's come over here and use these range tools. So you can do a color range selection, just like you do the color selection in Photoshop. So if I come over here with my eyedropper and I pick her red coat, it's going to pick a range of her red coat, and I can refine that to get more coat. And you can see it's because the red is getting into the skin tones. I'm going to have to, intersect or subtract that out, but it's doing a pretty good job with finding that coat, and I think it displays much better than when you're trying to do like a color selection in Photoshop, where it just shows you the dumb little thumbnail and you're not sure if you're catching what you're trying to do as well. So I really do like this thing. And then of course there's this nice little invert button. So if you weren't just trying to do like a spot color, just the red coat and everything deselected, desaturated, you could do that. But now I can do something like, oh, well, maybe the coat shouldn't be red. Maybe let me come in here with my hue slider, and I can now start, changing the coat to all these different colors. And we can do a similar range. Let's use this one here. So here's the original picture. I really want to bring up this background and be more of kind of a solid white. You can see I didn't have a perfectly illuminated backdrop there, but that's okay. I can come in here with the illumination range, luminance range, and I can just kind of, eyedrop what's there, and you can see it's gotten some of it. Now I can come in here and I can refine that a little bit, and you see it's also bleeding off the other direction. I don't want some of that. So it may not be a perfect example of what I'm trying to achieve here, but you get an idea that luminance value is what I'm really hoping for. And then, so now I can bring up the exposure on that. And then when I see like, oh, okay, well, it's picked up some of her in the chair, I don't want that. So I could either come in with a brush and spend a lot of time doing the brush, or I could even subtract something I haven't shown before, and that is objects. With objects, you pick an area, and it's going to try to find the objects in that area and make a mask from them. So her hand, her other hand, the back of the chair, maybe even this leg over here. I'm going to say, go find objects in this area I just defined for you. It did manage to find, see, the hands. It found just the leg and didn't take out anything around it. So this is a really nice way of kind of letting Lightroom do a lot of that brush work for you by identifying those objects in the scene and creating masks or modifying masks with that neat AI feature. Just those features alone have really improved my workflow So once I have a subject in my studio, lighting, etc., I'm going to take hundreds of pictures, right? And I may decide I need to process, say, 30 of them, because that's what this customer paid for. Well, by telling Lightroom to create these masks, and none of them are perfect, but they're close, right? They're 80, 90% of the work I need to be done. They're going to get there, and I can always come in and I can modify a little bit of it at the end, because each one of these AI masks is a raster mask, right? So I can go in with a brush and kind of clean those up anyway. Now I'm going to come to like the most fun part of it is this people detection. So obviously people in your shot are probably going to be your subjects, so why not just use the subject selection? Well, the answer, if my slow laptop will ever get there, is once you click on this person, it's going to analyze the entire image, and it's going to allow you to select face skin or body skin or just the eyebrows or just the lips, or because there are teeth in this.
How do you get back to this? How do you get to this area?
It just shows up when you click on the brush, and if no, I didn't select subject, I select person.
Okay.
Right? And so if there are 3 people in the picture, you're going to get 3 little bubbles pop up. Well, I see 3 people. What do you want to do with your people? So here in this particular kind of shot, I usually work and I process the skin on the face. So let's select that. I also going to work the body skin, but I'm going to edit that differently. So I want that to be a different mask. And her lips are on point and her teeth don't need to be whitened, but her hair, I want that. And I want you to, I click say create 3 separate masks, not just one, because I want to work with each of these separately, right? Yeah. Create masks. So it's going to create those 3 separate masks for me. So here's mask 1, face skin. Here's mask 2, which is body skin. And here's mask 3, just what I told it to do. And it's done a magnificent job. Maybe not 100% perfect, but it's going to be good enough for me to get started, right? So now with the face on, I'm going to go way overboard here with the clarity and the texture. And I'm going to select Y for before and after. So pretty good job, I must say. And look, I didn't have to mask off her mouth because that wasn't part of it. And if her eyes were open, I'd have 2 other options. The scala, the whites of the eye, and the iris and pupil were both 2 different other masks that I could have picked. So if I want to brighten the eyes, brighten the whites, those masks would have shown up on that subset. So with just this one little stroke, and obviously I've gone overboard, she looks a little flat. Let's just make her Barbie doll. There we go. Go crazy, and obviously that's not right. So let's just go back. But when I go to say her body skin, I am going to like go a little bit more on that. So let's take that off, and it's like dook, dook. There you go. Looks like Portrait Pro, a little overdone, right? But you could dial it back, right? You can just continue dialing that back until you see those pores come back. But it's taken out quite a lot of the blemishes and the adjustments in the skin tone. And of course, here's mask 3 in this particular case. It's her hair. I would like to have her hair not only show a little bit more detail, so I'm going to bump the sharpness a little bit. And I'm going to bump the, because she has that dark hair with those highlights, I want to see more of that. I'm going to just bump the overall exposure in just her hair. And see, that looks pretty natural to me. There you go. And so now, doing something like portraiture, headshots, and things like that, I'm spending a fraction of the time that I used to spend cleaning people up, making, getting the skin looking great, getting them a nice little glow in there, playing with the sliders and the texture and the clarity and stuff. Even dehaze, I even undehaze a little bit, brings a little bit of a glow. Easy to go overboard, but you get an idea of just how that's working. So now, you know, in just a few clicks, I've actually done with this image, you know, most of the work.
Go back and click on you said person?
Oh, yeah, yeah. So, okay, it appears two places. If you already have masks in place, you can create a new mask and there's the select people.
Okay.
If you have no masks, and I'm going to go ahead and just kill them, delete all masks. With this selected, see down here? Like I said, if there were multiple people in here, they would all show up in this list, and you could make a separate set of adjustments, separate set of masks for each person, based on what it saw in the shot. If I click on this one, it's been able to identify that our eyes are open, so I'm going to get 2 additional masks eventually. Iris and pupil, you see those, and the sclera, so you can adjust the whites of our eyes separate than the thing. So again, those used to be a pain in the butt to hand brush those in, or what I used to do is I would make an elliptical for each eye, and then I would Boolean out the iris, so then I could adjust the whites without causing the iris to get too glowy, and that. But now I can just select them here. Now I'm really going to blow your mind. You ready?
Yeah.
I'm going to select all 4 of these images.
I was wondering how it handles like synchronizing and stuff like that.
I'm going to go into the mask mode. I'm going to find the person.
No kidding. And you can make an edit.
And I'm going to do the same, all 4 of those. I'm going to do
a different mask.
The face, the body. Let's do the whites of her eyes just for something different because we didn't do that before. And the hair again.
Right.
All right. So because sync is on and I have 4 images selected, now I can create the masks. And it's
creating a unique mask for each one.
It's AI tool is going to each image and saying, identify the
mask.
No, it's not. It's going to be a unique. Each one of these masks is going to be unique for each image. And because all these masks have the same name, when I come in here and I adjust, let's say on the face, if I want to do the exact same treatment, I do it like this. And it's doing it for all 4 images, right? Same thing with this, so I'm going to go crazy with that. I'm going to soften all that. Look at that. Local adjustment updated for 4 images. And what was mask 3? Oh yeah, eye sclera. So there's your eye whitening. I know, right? There's your eye whitening. Again, you can tell the mask isn't perfect, but that's okay. You can easily go in and adjust it. But I'm just going to do what the eye whitening does. Like it brings the exposure up ever so slightly. That's a little too much, and it brings down the saturation ever so slightly. It's updated for each one, but unique to that image's mask set.
Right.
So remember I showed this mask here. This is the last thing I want to show you. You notice this mask is a little sloppy.
Yeah.
Right. So I want to come in here and I want to do a subtract brush. And I want to come in here and just because I want this to be good, I'm going to kind of clean that up just a little bit. It's going a little bit into her eyelash. And I want those to be nice and sharp. There you go. I've cleaned that up a little bit. Because I forgot to turn off auto sync, the subtraction that I performed was mismatched. But notice that this additional brush that I added is its own separate record. So I can easily just go in there and just delete that brush update. And now see where I had screwed up a little bit, it just goes away. So I can still fix, even if I screw up and forget to turn off the auto sync, when I go into, and work individual files, because again, it didn't add it directly, it did a Boolean operation, and that brush is now its own separate entity. I can now go in and fix it or correct it or get rid of it. This has improved my workflow to the point where I'm saving so much time editing headshots, fashion shoots, family portraiture, you name it, that I don't have to I don't have to up my pricing from pre-pandemic days, and I'm still making more money because I'm spending less time here at the computer editing, far less time than I used to spend. You know, I still always go back and I do those subtle things, you know, at the end to kind of give things my style. But all this grunt work, it literally used to be grunt work, and you know now Lightroom's really done all this stuff for me that I don't have to mess with it anymore. All right, that is the end of the presentation. Did we get to everything? Backgrounds, yes. Subject, yes. Luminance, yes. Color, yes. People, yes. In Disney World, all rides exit through the gift shop, so you get a commercial from me. But anyway, this is my set of 4 that these are my 4 most popular classes. They're the ones I'm going to do this winter, starting in January. And there's the price list. Again, I haven't raised my prices since pre-pandemic. I probably should, but I'm not gonna. I'd rather get more people in seats. I also have gift certificates, so if you're not interested yourself, but have people that might, you can even get stuff for, you can get a digital one in time for Christmas if you really wanted to. So that is my commercial. What do you want to see in future workshops? I'd like to do one a month, like I was kind of doing pre-pandemic days. But I'd love to know what topics would be of interest to bring you back here. What would you like to talk about, and what days and times work best?